You ready?
Well, I'm State Representative Ronald Renuart, and it's been an honor and privilege to represent St. Johns County these last 4 years in the Florida House of Representatives. Now, we've done what Washington, D.C. said we couldn't do. We've balanced the state budget with significant reductions in revenue, but yet we didn't raise taxes on our citizens or small business. And we did this by holding government to living within its means, just like Florida families have to do. Well, redistricting did change my district significantly. About 2/3 of my constituents in this new race are new to me, and this gives me a chance to introduce myself to you. I'm also the chair of the Florida House delegation for St. Johns County. And the last time we sat around the dais, around the table, we had 3 state senators and 3 state representatives. And we had over 60 years of legislative experience. But with this redistricting, we go down to just 1 state senator and just 2 state representatives. That's half of our current delegation. And if you understand how things work in Tallahassee, it's those relationships that you make that are important, and what you send and what you bring to Tallahassee. And we have to get things that are important to St. Johns County through both chambers of the House and the Senate to get them approved. I'm also a combat veteran. I served 3 combat tours with the Florida Army National Guard, 2 in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, and I retired last year after 20 years of service as a full colonel. And I'm the only physician in all the state government that's eligible for re-election. And with all those healthcare decisions that are going to be placed on the state this next year, you understand why the incoming speaker feels it's so important to have me return to the Florida House. Well, these last years, I've continued to do the same things. I've worked towards smaller government, fewer taxes, and more individual freedoms that come with individual responsibilities. And I look forward to your vote to help keep Doc in the Florida House. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we start with a subject near and dear to your heart, and that's Medicaid, or what we call the Pac-Man of the state budget, just chewing it up. What actions should the state be taking to slow down the growth of this and perhaps even to cut the cost of Medicaid?
Yeah, and certainly the background, it's currently about 1/3 of the state budget, and every year that just ratchets up a little bit more. Some people have even predicted by the year 2016, 2017, it could be half of the current state budget. We passed a major reform program back in 2011 during session, and it's currently sitting on the desk of Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius' desk for a waiver that would move more of the Medicaid lives into managed care, but yet setting up provider service networks which would allow for competition to keep that managed care in check. This would give better oversight for less fraud, particularly in some of the South Florida areas where we've seen it. It allow for better management of the patient's care and keep them out of the emergency department, give them somewhere else to go prior to showing up in the ER with sore throats and minor illnesses that could otherwise be cared for. We have to be conscious of the taxpayer dollar and make sure that we're using it efficiently and effectively to provide the best care possible.
This changes that before Secretary Sebelius. If they come about, what is it going to do 10 years down the road for the Medicaid costs for the state?
Well, what it should do is stabilize that line in the budget, because what we'll do is we'll allocate money to the managed care plans and the provider service networks to care for populations of patients. And they will be allowed to make a certain profit for the care, because they're in business and they have to keep their doors open. We'll also see a savings too. Their profits will have a cap or a limit on them of how much they can make. This way it gets government out of the way of providing health care, because every time the government seems to get involved in health care, all the vendors and the providers, they seem to increase the cost, because they know, or what they feel, is that it's not the government's money. It's just money. It's not the individual's money. They don't realize that it's hardworking taxpayers and citizens that have to provide that money for the government to function.
Let's talk about any other questions on Medicaid, because I think we hit the top. The governor is proposing not signing up with Medicaid expansion under the health care law as passed by the led by Congress and signed by President Obama. Do you agree with the governor?
Well, this is something we're certainly going to spend a lot of time on this next session.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the overall numbers, it'd be very difficult to make this work at this time. The plan, the President Obama's health care plan, what it calls for is a significant expansion in the state Medicaid program. Mm-hmm. The state Medicaid program just recently, because of the downturn of the economy, expanded from 2.4 million patients to about 3 million patients. Mm-hmm. That was just with how people fell under the current threshold because of their current economic standing. And the expansion would allow for another 1.9 million people in the state of Florida to be eligible. For the first 3 years, the federal government will pay the difference in that cost. But after that, it becomes more and more the state's responsibility. And what we don't see in this health care plan is all the strings that are going to be tied to these dollars. They're going to make additional requirements beyond what we're currently providing in our Medicaid program. The Agency for Healthcare Administration projects that by the year 2020, we'll be spending out of general revenue another $1.5 billion that we don't have right now. That's money that would have to come, from transportation, from schools, from corrections, from public safety, and we don't have that money. The overall cost is $8.5 billion per year for that expansion. And this is also Florida taxpayer money that goes to the federal government, and it's essentially passing through the government and they're returning portions of it. Mm-hmm. And while these 1.9 million people are not relying on Medicaid program currently for their health care, they're not in this entitlement program currently, expanding it is going to take funds, it's going to take services away from those who do need the care from Medicaid, who critically need the services that we provide because they can't get it otherwise or they're severely disabled. And that would be essentially tragic not to be able to provide the level of care we provide currently.
Okay, so do you agree with the governor then who's saying that he does not support the state, because the Supreme Court ruling has this option, the state not expanding Medicare as called for in the new federal health legislation?
With all the information I reviewed, I'd have to concur with the governor.
Okay. Let's talk about education. There are several issues in St. Johns County that are really hot. Education obviously is one. It's the driver of our growth. Growth management is another. It's a hot issue, and it swings back and forth with the pendulum. We'll get to that in a second. As you know, the superintendent of schools, the school administration, the school board, all opposed to many of the changes that the legislature has done. And they see it as twofold. One is driving up the cost of business and cutting their revenue. So one is pay for performance. And their argument with that is that it just would be so expensive they can't afford it. And I gave that example at the forum, that if the average salary went from $48,000, which is what it is now, to $60,000, and the number of teachers, that's $23 million a year extra money. And they say the money isn't there. Governor Bush, Jeb Bush, has said that's true. It won't work unless the money's there. So one, where's the money going to come from? And two, will that money ever come for this?
Well, I don't think the state government, that the legislature itself has mandated the salaries for the teachers.
Just a shorthand, that's what Bill Proctor said is the goal of the legislation, is one of the fathers of it, was to get the salaries to what he said were professional grade, and he said that was $60,000.
Well, certainly we want to reward our high-performing teachers. Mm-hmm. And the current system does cross-the-board benefits and bonuses to reward all teachers, whether they're high-performing, middle of the pack, or sometimes poorly performing. Mm-hmm. We want to recognize those who are doing a better job. And that was one of the focuses from the legislation that was passed. Mm-hmm. And it's not really as much how much money that we put into the schools, but it's how that money that is allocated is being used. And that's real important as we move forward. A lot of the funds that that we get for our students don't make it to the classroom level, to the teacher-student level. Teachers are being required to be more bookkeepers than they are actually tending to the responsibility as far as teaching because of some of the requirements that have been placed upon them. We don't have the best way to look and evaluate teachers. We really need to look to the educators to help come up with how to do that. But we need accountability for the Florida taxpayers' dollars. A lot of money does go into education, and the taxpayers want to see that we're getting return on our money. We're very blessed in St. Johns County to have such a good school system. My wife and I, we have 7 children. All 7 of our children have been educated through public schools. And I've got a son who's a rising senior at Ponte Vedra High School currently. So we have full faith in the public school system that we have, and certainly here in St. Johns County. And one of the challenges that we have as we educate these children, we send them off to college. And then there's no jobs for them to return to, when they're done with college. And I'd like to see even my grandchildren educated by the St. Johns County schools. I don't know if we'll have that opportunity unless we have the jobs for our children. So increasing the jobs, lowering the unemployment rate, improving the economy is one of those ways to increase the funding that we can use to better education.
Okay, but just to get back to the point, the point is that pay for performance will drive up the cost, and the other part of the equation is putting more money into charter schools and voucher school programs will take away from public education. Asked the question about giving money to bowls, and your answer was the money should follow the student. Those students are not getting money now statewide, so that money is going to come from somewhere. So if we're putting kids for St. Joe's or bowls, or to if it becomes law to permit funding for kids going to religious schools, that money is going to come from somewhere. There doesn't appear to be any money. The concern from the school district is expenses are going to be up and revenue is going to be down, and it's because of legislative policy.
Actually, what I said in the forum is that we need to actually focus on that student that's attending a failing school. And the way the voucher programs are set up currently, it's for businesses in the state of Florida to get some tax relief, taxes they would have otherwise paid to the state into these programs to allow for those who are at schools that are repeatedly failing to use a waiver to attend an alternate school, whether that be a charter school or it can be a private school. Let's not lose focus on that student. Because that student, if we're failing them, why do we have to say they've got to stay in that field?
I get you. I just want to pound this home to
Sure.
And that is the school district, the school board believes and perceives that the legislature is implementing policies that are going to drive up their cost and cut their revenue from the state. Is that a valid concern that they have?
I don't. That's not our intention. That's certainly not the intention to do that. Our intention is to help our public schools be the best they can and to provide a world-class education to our students. That's the intention. I know you struck on one part I was going to mention, but the waivers are really to protect those that are in failing schools.
Okay, and I get that, but there's there's a ballot amendment that would permit funding for religious schools. Kim Kendall has made it very clear that she hopes that passes so that we can provide funding for religious schools as well. And if that were to happen, there would also have to be for schools like Bowles. And so you basically have more kids that you'd be paying for. And the concern of the school district is that would come at their expense.
Well, I mean, if it passes as a constitutional amendment, that's the word of the people of the state of Florida, and we certainly abide by that. But if taxpayer dollars are being moved to private schools, we still have to have the same accountability that we do as it goes forward, as would go to public schools. We have to make sure that they're providing that level of education that we would expect for our students. So I still believe there's got to be accountability, even if the funding goes elsewhere. Now, when you mentioned the vouchers, now a voucher doesn't mean that the county loses all the FEFP money, all the per student money for that student. They still get a portion of that, even though they don't have to educate that student.
Okay, well, I hear what you're saying. Let me just go on a couple of quick things in this and get to other topics. The school district is, superintendent and school board members are all very concerned about the loss of, they said, access to $64 million in school construction funds. That's a big deal for them because this district has the need to build a new school year. And they're forced to be building K through 12, which is not the model, K through 8 rather, which is not the model they prefer, but they're forced to do so to save money. And they say that the legislature is pushing money for charter schools, but not for public schools, as they exist here. I understand that under the legal definition, charter schools are perceived by some as public. But the question here is, St. Johns County, your district, needs money for school construction. They say that the legislature is putting it in other places which don't benefit St. Johns County. You represent it. What would you propose doing next year to help solve a major problem for your constituents?
Well, there certainly needs to be some flexibility in some of the ad valorem taxes that the school board does control. Mm-hmm. I know that one of the challenges we've had from the school boards is they were being told that they can't use some of their funds for bricks and mortar, where they'd like to use it that way, and some of the funds that are in some areas of the state that are tied to bricks and mortar they can't use for the classrooms. Mm-hmm. I believe that there should be some flexibility for the school boards to give them a little bit more leeway of how they should budget. Mm-hmm. Every section of the state budget has seen some reductions. Now, we did move $1.1 billion into the schools, and now that didn't make up all the money that we lost from the TARP funds back 2 or 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, every time you increase a budget, people rely on those additional funds, but those additional funds flamed out after, I think it was 3 years. But the legislature made a full effort to move that general revenue, and that's not easy to do. There's very little of the state budget is actually part of the general revenue.
The school district is, they point these figures out. The school, in 4 years ago, the state was providing $7,200 per student. It's now $6,275, a decline of $927. They point this out to say that, well, the governor says they're increasing spending, but from where they sit, they don't see it. They see the spending being cut. Education is probably the #1 driver of growth in this county. That's why people come here, for the wonderful schools. If you're reelected, what actions would you take to help restore these funds? This is what we hear all the time.
Yet we're arguing over a school system that's doing very well. Mm-hmm. And is very successful and the most successful in the state. Mm-hmm. We've been educating the students in St. Johns County and doing a fantastic job. Mm-hmm. And it's not just throwing money at a problem that mm-hmm. solves the answer. Mm-hmm. There are plenty of areas around the United States that you can use examples where they're paying 1.5 to almost 2 times per student, yet they don't even have the success that we have here in the state of Florida. The state of Florida, over the last, I think 6 years, has gone from 3rd from the bottom as far as performance on a national level to number 11 in the United States, based on Education Weekly. That's a tremendous improvement. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't by throwing extra money at the issue. We would love to have more money to help our schools. Mm-hmm. That's certainly a top priority, and it is a core mission of the state government. But the money's not there. The economy has been in a downturn, and as the economy improves, there'll be more funding available.
Okay, I'll change the subject to growth management. As you're aware, that this caused just a firestorm of controversy of the growth management law, and there's the thing that has just really upset St. Johns County was the 5,000 homes built in Palm Coast, approved, not built. Approved, and it's because of the change in the law, which you no longer have to show a need. St. Johns County fought that, said it would change the character of southern St. Johns County if those 5,000 homes were approved. The law was changed so that St. Johns County withdrew because it had no legal standing because of the change in the law. What is your view on being able to get permits to build houses for which there is no demand? The developer of this project acknowledges there's no demand for this, but he's now getting approval. He has it locked in, and he's just going to keep getting extensions until there is a demand for those houses. People are arguing, hey, this affects us and we don't have a say in it anymore, and these guys are getting approval for houses for which there's no need. You voted for that, so, and this is a part that has really upset people in St. Johns County. So give us your defense for it.
Sure. Well, this was part of a very comprehensive growth management bill that we passed in 2011. And most of this bill was to look at ways to streamline the state government and how state government placed regulations on growth and really hurt competition with areas, particularly in North Florida, when we're competing with areas such as South Georgia for businesses and industry. The streamlining did reduce some of the state oversight for local issues. And one thing that happens is when you have the state blanket a law that covers everywhere, you get things that maybe work in the Panhandle that don't work here in St. Augustine, and the things that work in St. Augustine don't work in South Florida or Central Florida. So the one-size-fits-all bills that we see out in the state of Florida actually hold some areas back that are in need of growth. And it really falls on the local government to make these decisions. Now, each one of these things is a change in the comprehensive plan, that was, it's written periodically, and it's got to go through periodic review. This would allow a little more flexibility for the local communities to decide how they want their growth to take place. Now, you mentioned...
I just want to point out that the argument in St. Johns County is that they lose that voice. The growth is going to be right on the border, 5,000 homes, and so if there's a local community or local county loses a say, just the opposite of what you're saying.
You're saying that St. Johns County doesn't dictate what happens in Flagler County.
They're saying that what happens in Flagler County affects St. Johns County, and St. Johns County has lost a voice because of the change in the law.
Well, and the same thing happens at the state line too. If there's development right over the state line of Georgia, it also affects what happens over the state line of Florida. But Flagler County has got to have more of its home control, of its growth. St. Johns County does too. And there is some protections for lands that are sensitive in the state of Florida that are built into this growth management plan. There is more focus on developing inner cities and large urban areas to stimulate more growth there rather than the suburban sprawl. This bill was worked on by multiple groups, the Florida Association of Counties, the Florida League of Cities. While they weren't in full support, were very active members of giving input, even groups such as the Audubon Society. But really, what we saw is that the state of Florida was overstepping its bounds as far as being the judge and jury over local growth issues. And you may see some exceptions. There may be some intended consequences from this bill, and those are things we might need to review in the future.
You just mentioned environmental protections. One of the things that the county is concerned about is that developers still have to mitigate for environmental concerns. The state's cut the funding that the state provided to check to see if they actually did do the mitigation. So the county is in the position of either having to come up with the money to pay for it, or no one's going to check to see if the mitigation is being done. The county is concerned that this is an added cost to them. What's your take on that?
Well, typically what happens is you get multiple inspectors and multiple oversight people that are checking the same thing, and it's duplication and it's costing taxpayers money. And this allows the local government to do their oversight and do their due diligence, and relying on the state to do a second check on these things.
Well, their argument is that this was a function done by the state, paid by the state. Now that there's no money by the state to do it, so the county doesn't have any money to do it, so either it's not going to get done or the county's going to have to spend the money to do it, which they now do not have. Does that fall into the land of unintended consequences?
Well, this is the county responsibility. That's what the county is responsible to do as far as growth.
Okay, they're arguing was a state responsibility. It's now coming to them and there's no money. The state had been doing it basically a transfer of a cost. Let's talk about transportation concurrency. That's another hot growth management issue. We're still a county that's going to boom. One of the earlier guests said that about 35% developed, which means about 65% not developed, and we eventually will be. Under the growth management laws, that concurrency for transportation is optional, and the state, this is from the county now, the county says if it's strictly applied as suggested by the state of Florida, transportation concurrency becomes practically ineffective, and few developments will be required to mitigate their impacts. And this is the question from the county. Do you think it is the role of state governments to dictate how local governments regulate land use issues and mitigation of local impacts?
Within reason. You know, what the concern is at the state level is that there is multiple requirements in different areas and different regions of the state, making it very difficult for roads. You know, a lot of roads cross county lines, and the requirements on the roads would change, you know, as you go through county areas. You know, so again, I believe that there should be local control, you know, of a lot of these decisions, but it's also got to be reasonable. One of the things that we've seen in parts of the state is that impact fees were collected and not used for the concurrency in roads and schools, and they were never returned back to those who paid that money. And
is that a problem here?
I don't know.
Well, again, their argument is that they come in with PUDs and DRIs, especially PUDs. The roads are eventually going to have to be built, and someone else will have to pay for them. So rather than the developer paying for them, the people moving in, it's going to fall to the taxpayers. Otherwise, there'd be gridlock on the roads. That's their argument. I want to go over this. This is a Legislative Office of Economic and Demographic Research has reported that state's unemployment rate would have gone down only 0.3% in the last 2 years. Had all the workers who were looking for jobs continued to look for jobs. But basically the discouraged workers have dropped out of the workplace, and that's why our unemployment rate is 8.2 rather than 9.6, I believe it is. And when I asked this question at the forum, I was surprised at the response I got, because no one addressed the issue. I asked it from St. Johns County. And it would seem to me that there are some obvious things for development in St. Johns County to partner with our friends in Duval County, and no one answered. Obviously, to me, it's a Port of Jacksonville in the medical community. Do you see anything in the job situation for expanding growth, improving growth in St. Johns County, the partnership with the two big economic drivers in Northeast Florida, which is the health community, it used to be real estate, but right now it's the health community and the Port of Jacksonville?
Well, yes, and certainly I've been very much the support of these things in Tallahassee. You know, the Northeast Florida delegation has been very strong behind expansion of the port. Now we're not just competing, you know, with ports in other states. We're also competing with ports within the states, and that's why it's very important that we have a strong delegation representing us here in St. John's and Northeast Florida. Yeah, the expansion of the port is going to have a trickle-down effect on St. John's. Even funding for transportation and roads. You know, 9B was one of those things we argued about the importance of that with the port coming into play, how we need those additional roads and essentially a beltway or a loop around Jacksonville. There's going to be a lot of people who decide to live in St. Johns County because they prefer the schools and other amenities that we offer here, yet they'll work in some function that relates to our port. Healthcare is still the biggest industry actually in Duval County. Being a physician and being part of that, you know, we're seeing better services being offered from different hospital groups in the county, and we're seeing expansion of hospitals and kind of extended freestanding emergency rooms to provide for these new populations of people that have moved into the north region of the county area.
There was talk when I first got here, which was 8 years ago, of partnering with the University of Florida to build a University of Florida medical school, to have a research facility here so that the medical staff would be closer to the Mayo, Baptist, and the other wonderful hospitals in Duval County. That fell by the by. Is any talk about that?
Well, what year are you referring to? Just
I got here in 2004, so it was 2005, 2006. Well, it's still hot.
And actually, and unfortunately, what happened? Other areas jumped on that before we did. And right now, we have 9 medical schools in the state of Florida.
This wasn't talking about a medical school. It was talking about a research facility.
Oh, you said medical school. That's tied to it.
If I did, I was incorrect. It was medical. I think I meant medical facilities. They're talking about a research component.
Biomedical research.
So as a way of being able to attract more people to the medical school and to get them in closer partnership with the outstanding hospitals in Duval County.
Yeah, and this was when Jeb Bush was in office, and the biomedical research corridor was really more focused down in Palm Beach County, and it did not come up to North Florida like we would have hoped. And even that segment of our growth expansion has been slow to develop because of the way the economy has turned since then. That's still a good area for us to look to as far as qualified targeted industries that we want to attract to the state of Florida, and it's worth us looking into with groups like Enterprise Florida to try and continue to track that, because that is a clean business that does bring high-tech, high-paying jobs that Floridians deserve and Floridians desire, and we're certainly all for attracting more of that right now.
Okay, I asked you a question that all the 3 candidates all agreed in this, and that's the law that the legislature passed and the governor signed, that the counties would have to pay Medicaid bills that the county says they don't owe. I said at the forum it was $900,000. I was wrong, it was $700,000. You all agreed that that should happen. I found it afterwards, so I said, well, it's great, but the state's been here. They've said we're standing by it, and that's it. So basically, the county doesn't feel it's been listened to. People from the state did come. They said, well, we're sticking with it. So my question is, what legislative remedy, if any, do you anticipate will come up? We're not the only county that's concerned about this.
This is a big controversy at the state. Now, this didn't go through the policy committees. This went through the Appropriations Healthcare Committee. But I've had some conversations with Jerry Cameron about how this affects St. Johns County, and I think this needs a lot more additional oversight from the state level. This has to do with the Agency for Healthcare Administration, their computer system that they had, and how they were calculating what each county owed for the Medicaid program. And apparently they found they had a huge glitch and they were undercharging, and supposedly they're going back and doing some of the recharges and balancing that off over a number of years. But yet the counties don't even have the records anymore to defend themselves one way or the other. The Agency for Healthcare Administration is one of those agencies that we've looked at the legislative level. And we probably, because we reduced everybody's budget, this is a way they're trying to balance their budget.
Counties have figured that out.
Yeah, and they have. And so we definitely need to look at this before moving too much further on it.
Okay, I want to change the law to the 1020 life, question rather, to the 1020 life sentencing law. There are 2 cases locally recently. A woman who was having an argument with her husband shot a gun into the wall. She was sentenced for 20 years. A gentleman in Putnam County who was trying to scare off some people who were threatening him or one of his grandchildren, fired a gun into the ground. They're both sentenced to 20 years in prison. The man has since gotten a retrial, but he hasn't gone to trial yet. Some in the legal community arguing that the punishment far exceeds the crime. They didn't shoot at anybody. They were shooting to scare somebody off, but they fired a gun in the commission of a crime, and hence automatically 20 years of life. Is this a law worth revisiting?
Well, I think every law out there, if we find out there's ways it's being applied is not the initial intention of the legislature, should be reviewed. And we should get input from that. And when we mentioned somebody's getting 20 years, that means this wasn't the first offense. This means this is a second offense. And it really should be, what crime is it? Are they participating in a felony crime, or is it just an argument type crime, and they shoot a hole in the ground or something like that? I mean, that's some, that a judge would have to make those determinations. As a legislator, I don't like the judges trying to legislate from the bench. And as a legislator, I've got to be responsible that I'm not being a judge from the chamber. So we got to make sure that we're not pigeonholing our judges to make the wrong decision, but we also want to be assured that they are making the proper decisions going forward.
We remember the case in Putnam County. The judge refused to sentenced him to 3 years. The prosecutor, the woman in Duval, appealed and won, and they had to get another judge because the judge said the sentence far outweighed the crime. And so that was the case of, I don't know if legislating from the bench, but certainly saying in a rather pointed way that he disagreed with the legislature. I'm going to, I have more questions, but I feel like I'm dominating, so I'm going to shut up.
You think?
Margot.
This online travel controversy is still prevailing, and I know you heard from St. Johns County and everybody in this area about that bed tax increment that you don't get. Why? And I've heard the argument that, well, it helps the economy because it brings the tourist here. Why is the legislature so reluctant to helping our own counties in this, bring more of that tax base back to the counties?
That's a good question, because it's very controversial and kind of convoluted.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you both sides, and I'll tell you where I stand on this. These companies such as Travelocity, Expedia and Orbitz and those companies, they claim that the fees are to be paid for the amount that they say they buy the room for $50. That when Holiday Inn, or I'm just using the company name, but a hotel sells a bed for $50 because they anticipate it was going to be empty, that they're supposed to just pay the taxes on that portion of $50. Well, online, if they sell it for $70, that $70 was essentially almost like a finder's fee. But what I don't like about that is that it's companies from out of state and out of the area that are making profits and filling these beds, because more and more people are going to those sites rather than going to the mom and pop hotels and resorts that we have here. And I don't like that competition with our local businesses. There's been plans for exempting those who are these major internet companies, but then you see major chains also having their internet sales and wanting the same exemption for selling their own rooms and saying that it's at this rate and the rest is our finder's fee. So we have not come up with a happy medium there at the legislative level, because both arguments make sense, because it is what that company's making, not just on the room, but it is a loss of revenue to the local government, and it's competition with our local businesses that I don't like.
So you're not in favor of it?
I'm not in favor of it across the board exemption for the tax on the difference. I would like to see maybe some compromise, maybe a portion, and I haven't seen the compromise yet that I support.
Okay. Let me ask you about federal money for roads. The way it comes now, it comes not in a lump sum to the state, but for the state has to show, like the Metropolitan Planning Organization in Jacksonville, we want to build a road and here's the impact it's going to have. But then you can't use it for any other road. So Do you feel like these funds should come to the state as a lump sum because we're growing so fast, and well, you see what I-95 looks like now, and you know, pretty soon it'll be 8 lanes either way. I mean, so what do you think about how that money should come?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at the federal transportation dollars and how they come to the state. Again, I mean, this is Florida taxpayers' money that has passed from state citizens' hands to go to the federal government to come back to us, and you never get quite as much back as you pay into it. Well, it's good to have, you know, that oversight at the federal level when it's like an interstate highway or something like that. You know, there's a lot more that become the state's responsibilities. 9A, for example, has been a state road as 9A, and now all of a sudden we've done all the work, we paid for it. Now it becomes the Eastern Beltway of 295, you know, because it is, you know, the state taxpayers that have funded this because we do what would be best for us. I'd like to see less federal government intrusion into the state decisions on these road decisions.
But you'd like to see the money come back.
I would like to not see the money go there in the first place. Yeah. But yes, the funds that we pay, we should see return.
Okay. Okay. Ron?
Hot topic has been immigration. Other states have taken some pretty stringent actions in the legislation. What are your views on what Florida should be doing on the immigration question?
Well, people who are here illegally, and they know it, certainly should not receive the same privileges as those who have gone through the process and been here legally. We've really lost the value of what it is to be a U.S. citizen when somebody can just cross a border, set up shop, make a wonderful living, and really get away without even paying taxes on that. When somebody goes through the process, sometimes has to wait years. They're working at a business and they're paying significant taxes to be a citizen, or at least to have a privilege of being able to work here in the United States. So I'm very concerned with how we sort of handle our immigrants. We've got to do it in a proper manner that you know, respects people, but yet we need to close off our borders, and we need to have, you know, tall fence, if you will, but yet we also have to have a wide gate that allows those who are really looking to immigrate legally into the United States and participate in our society and our communities to have that avenue to do so.
Okay, thank you. Insurance. Big deal. It's on your brochure. It's been one thing I've heard since I've been here, and that is the state's intrusion into insurance of getting into that. Could you talk about what you think it ought to be and how that should be handled?
Another example of how state government gets involved in things that sounds good when it starts off and actually really messes things up. And the insurance business is something, in my opinion, that the state of Florida should have never gotten into in the first place. You know, we have the Office of Insurance Regulation that oversees insurances. They write the rules, and then we develop an insurance company, Citizens Insurance, for property insurance coverage, and yet we exempt them from the rules that are written. What we've done, unfortunately, is driven out a lot of the private insurance companies from the state of Florida in doing so. And that lack of competition has ratcheted up the cost on the people that we're trying to pool in the insurance and protect. And the only way to remedy that is to attract that competition back and restore citizens back to that insurer of last resort, which is what it was originally designed for the people that could not get insurance just because they were in such a risk area, or there was lack of insurances participating in a certain region. To do so, it's a slow process. We've had, each of the 4 years I've been in the legislature, we've had bills to improve this. Unfortunately, we had a governor that did not agree with our views and vetoed it the first two years. But the last 2 years, we've had bills that have been placed to try and you know, increase the responsibility on citizens, where they won't have to rely so much on putting fees on other insurance products around the state, and being more fiscally sound based on its risk. But we actually have about $2.5 trillion of development that lines the Florida coast. And a major catastrophic storm or a catastrophe could really wreak havoc on the state's economy. And this is something that's very serious. We also have the catastrophic fund, the CAT fund it's called, where we have about $28 billion that the state's on the hook for. We don't have that money just sitting in a corner somewhere. Unfortunately, we have probably $5–6 billion that we can readily get our hands on. I don't know the number for sure. And the rest we'd have to get with bonds or borrow. A few years back, we actually paid a huge sum of money to Warren Buffett just to have the chance that if we had a catastrophic storm to be able to borrow some of this money to support that CAT fund. And that's not the answer. Again, we need to attract more companies to come into the state of Florida, and we need to be fiscally sound. And
okay, you see that is something that's going to happen?
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the mood of the legislature is, that we have to make those changes. We wanted to make more sweeping changes, but it kind of got negotiated down as far as changing the responsibility on citizens, because they were worried about people who are on citizens currently will see a significant increase in their rates, which would put them more along the lines of the market. So it's kind of been tempered.
Citizens, Medicaid, all the pressures on various parts of government. Do you have a view on the third one that usually comes up is the obligation of states or municipalities for pensions? Do you see a need for Florida to get into the review its pension programs, and is that in need of reform? What are your thoughts?
Well, Florida is actually pretty fortunate with its Florida retirement system. That is actually one of the most sound ones in the United States, well over 80% funded. And you're not going to see 80% of the workforce all of a sudden up and retire at the same time. So even in this down economy, that program is doing better than others. But as we look forward, these defined pension programs are not the best way to go. Most private businesses have gone to the defined contribution plans, which are the 401k plans, where you contribute a certain amount, you decide which municipal mutual funds that you want to invest in, and you kind of control your own money and your own destiny as far as retirement. That is the better way to go forward. We need to look at new hires, and while we're encouraging, those options are out there currently, and we're encouraging people to use them, we need maybe some way to entice them to go that direction, and maybe the defined benefit plan is going to be the way of the dinosaur.
Doc, we appreciate you being here. Was there any final words you'd like to say in closing, sir?
No, and I just hope I've had a chance to speak to the people of St. Johns County. I'm absolutely honored that I'm going to have a chance to represent more of my home county after the 2012 elections, and I have a website, vote.renuart.com, if you need more information from me as a candidate. Thank you.
Thank you.